After living in Minnesota for over 13 years, I moved to San Francisco in the summer of 2001. And it was not a great time for employment. For those of you that were working at the time, remember it was the middle of the dot-com bust. So especially in San Francisco, there was a huge reduction in jobs. Literally, I remember that fall looking at the unemployment numbers in San Francisco, and they jumped from like 2% to 7% the month that I showed up in San Francisco. Now, a lot of that was in the tech sector, but a lot of that did spill over into financial services, and especially for someone who is in the position that I was in, which was about 5 years of experience, it was pretty challenging to find a job. So I thought back to a book that I read after actually I had gotten into college that was about how to get into college. And one of the things it said was, don't write the "I went to Europe and learned how big the world was" essay. And of course, that was the essay I wrote for most of my college essays. And I thought, well, I should apply this same theory to my cover letters for work. And so I actually wrote a cover letter that was formatted as a poem, first of all, and then it was very humorous. There were parts in it about living in my brother-in-law's walk-in closet and eating rice-a-roni, and that rice-a-roni was the San Francisco treat. And every day I would walk up to the top of Russian Hill and throw copies of my resume into the wind, hoping that they would land on people's desks, kind of just and goofy and funny and offbeat thing for a cover letter. And I got a bunch of responses from it. Many of them were positive. A couple of them were negative. But I decided that if somebody was going to react negatively to that I probably didn't want to work for them anyway. And so, but actually, I got a call from an assistant of the president of a hedge fund, and they scheduled an interview with me. Now, realize at this time, I had only ever worked in retail brokerage. I had never had anything to do with a hedge fund. I had worked in operations and compliance for about 3 years, and I had been kind of a relationship manager for 2 and then a rep for 1 at this point. And so I get dressed up, I go to the meeting. It was actually in the Transamerica Tower, downtown San Francisco, which happened to be right across the street from my office at the time. So over a lunch break, I had scheduled this meeting. I go over for the interview. Everything's fine. I walk in and sit down, and the gentleman looks at the resume in front of him, and he kind of chuckles to himself, and he looks up at me and says, I have to be honest with you. There's no way on earth I can hire you for this job. You don't have any of the relevant experience, but I just had to meet the guy who sent me this cover letter. So we actually had a very nice chat, and, normally you might think, this guy wasted my time, but he actually was a very nice guy, and we kind of chatted about marketing and the brokerage business, and I went on my way. But as we were preparing for this episode on interviewing, that was one of the times in my life when I did the most interviewing. And so that funny story about getting an interview for a job to which I had absolutely no qualifications was a good introduction to episode 32 of the Valuability Podcast, all about job interviews. We are going to talk about both the interviewee and the interviewer this week. The Valuability Podcast is for financial professionals, business owners, and anyone interested in financial planning, business, leadership, and personal development. We believe that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. My name is Danforth Fleek. I was a financial advisor and product wholesaler for over 20 years, and I am joined each week by my co-host, friend, and mentor, Philip Simonson. Philip was in financial services for over 40 years, also as a financial advisor, a field leader, sales trainer, and senior manager, covering areas such as advisor development and field operations. One last time, Philip, we need to close but I should say put the gravestone up for the excavator. Where is the beast? Where do we stand?
Well, Dan, am I coming? I'm looking at my recording just first. I'm flatlining, just like
Nope.
the beast.
That's just because you weren't talking. I was blabbing too much.
Oh,
You're
okay.
fine.
It's just thank you then.
It's all the way at the far right if you see it.
Yeah, now I do see it. I just saw the flat line and it reminded me of the excavator. It's flatlining as well. Again, just to remind people, the first one, my middle son, Garrett, he broke the tooth. Then, not a big deal. That's on the bucket. Then we replaced that. Then a hydraulic line he broke. He replaced that. Then, of course, I broke the thumb. That was a big ouch and very inexpensive. Then got that it was 3 weeks, got that fixed, and then Garrett, know your clearance on those machines. He was backing out of the woods, and I said, take those roots up and throw them to the side instead of just plowing them over. And he's going backwards. He's back blading to level this new road we're building. Sure enough, there goes the hydraulics again. He cut another line underneath the machine. Get that fixed. Then I take it out, fill it full of gas, and big buck comes by, and I shut it down, and I'm watching it and go to start it up, and flatline. Hydraulics will not even engage, Dan. So now snowfall's coming. It's of course, is there a manual on this thing? So no, but I do find a manual from a gentleman down, thank him, Orrin, down in Georgia. So we're going through the cause effect or diagnostics, but we have eliminated many things. So as soon as this thing gets started, though, and I can get it back up on that on the road, which is 86 yards, that's my goal line. I'm calling my cousin and just say, "Take it out of here! Take it out of here!" Happiness.
This is the final chapter.
Yeah, happiness would be seeing that thing and not the rear view mirror, seeing it move down the road, going down the road on a trailer.
The exact same concept as the 2 best days of the boat ownership, right?
Amen.
the second best day in your life is the day the excavator shows up. The first best is the day it leaves.
I don't even want to come home and tell Lisa. Oh, she just shakes her head. So I'm glad I got deep pockets.
Because it certainly might have cost less if you just hired somebody to do all this for you, right?
That's a great question, and Garrett and I have tossed that out. Of course, it's all advanced rationalization now, but I have come down to the conclusion that, no, you know what? It's been a great summer. I got to spend many. I got certainly 300-400 hours into this thing. I created great memories with Garrett.
Yeah.
Can't beat that. And if I was to pay someone, I mean, they're $50 an hour running that excavator. I've got over a mile of trails. So it's been good. Yeah, overall, it's been good, Dan. Good memory maker. Expensive, but good.
Well, you can find the Valuability podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. We also have a YouTube channel. Search Value-Ability on YouTube to find us there. Or you can find us on our website, value-ability.com. Click on the episodes tab, and our episode player is there. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share. If you'd like to connect with us, email info@value-ability.com. That's info@value-ability.com. Or you can touch base with us via social media. Our links for Twitter, Instagram, Facebook are all at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. And all of those links are right there. So jumping back to the concept of the job interview. Now, I have a majority of my experience on the interviewee side, although you trained me early on to do interviews, and I've done a fair number of them, honestly, more early on in my career when I was still in the corporate management side of things. But why don't we start out with some of the thoughts for the interviewer, and then I can jump in on the
Sure.
back end and talk a little bit more about the interviewee side of things.
Yeah, you bet. Uh, so this interviewing process, it is a process again. And one of our mantras to run a successful business, you must manage three things well, and that is net income, your processes, and your people. So talking about this one's going to cover certainly step, number two, processes. And so my first tip I would give people, it is a process, and you and the first thing, I would not confuse potential with ability. You know, to sustain optimal performance, studies have shown it comes down to talent, skill, and decision making. So what I'm going to look at talent. That's the things that they're born with. Skills are things that are developed over one's lifetime, and decision making is, how, if we found out is two times more powerful in talent and skill. So I'm going to look at their decision making, and then when and how they've done, particularly around certain key competencies I'm going to be hiring for the position that is open, and we'll cover some of those. But underneath potential, that comment potential versus ability. Underneath ability, I look at that acronym TRUE. We've talked about it before. Get real specific on the tasks that you're looking for. Tie those tasks and interview questions towards the competencies. And then I look at that for someone to be high in ability, they've got to have been trained on the task. They got to accept it as part of these tasks as part of as part of their role perception is the R. U is understand what to say and how to say it. And E, recent relevant successful experience. And you want to control role perception right up front, and the leader owns role perceptions. These are the tasks that that you'll be doing on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, and you want to be clear that they accept and understand those tasks. Because what I used to see is people, some of my managers would say, "Well, it was a bad hire. It was a bad hire." Well, there's no such thing as a bad hire. There is, that can be there is such thing as a bad hire, but most of the bad hires, if you do a great job in the selection process, you won't have the bad hire. It'll be, there's still some risk, but it'll be certainly minimized. But what you don't want to hear, and this is what I used to hear, well, 6 months down the road, what happened to this person? Well, they told me, my manager say, this wasn't what they signed up for. Well, that's not a bad hire. That's bad, process, in particular the selection process.
For that, let me jump in and ask you a quick question there, because that's a really interesting point. Because a lot of job descriptions throw in the other duties to be assigned by your manager kind of nonsense at the end, and they kind of hang their hat on, well, yeah, all of this stuff I didn't tell you in the job interview was under this, and I just see that as a cop out.
I agree. And I
Right?
would push them. Now they're interviewing you, you're also interviewing them.
That's a point I had already written down, was having processes as well is a huge sign to me as an interviewee of someone that I want to work for, right?
Yes.
Because just as much they're looking at you, you mentioned it to me uh, very early on when we first met, the concept of, hey, these people are your clients as much as they are, you're managing them. And you need to always think about it that way. And to a certain extent in the interview process, it's a balance, of course, right? But
Mhm.
you are selling your position to that person as if they're a person you really want. You're probably going to need to make it look attractive to them.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. As my father used to say, look, your number one asset leaves the door at 5 o'clock every night. It's your people, which is again is the item number three, managing and leading your people properly. And in this process, in this selection orientation process, what I want to do is I want to make sure that I find out what this person wants out of his or her career early on. And I then want to be able to put together a developmental plan to help them achieve what it is they want for themselves, or from a career perspective. So I'll come back to that. Well, we can even have a whole session on it. It's what I learned from my mentor, Doug Lennox. It's the witty whiffy process. But going back now, Dan, like you said, to the ability side. So as the interviewer, a couple tips I would just throw out right at the very beginning. Will Prest, a good friend of mine, and yours, Will. I
Hmm.
mean, Dan, he used to tell me, and he used to interview for a large Fortune 100 company. Uh, and that's what he made his living on early in his career. He says, don't, be careful of these biases. And you could have a bias that that person's too short, they're too tall, or hey, they're good looking, they're athletic, they were an athlete, and or geez, I didn't like the perfume, didn't like the jewelry, didn't like the mustache, or they're too fat. Forget those biases, because he said, but one thing, don't forget, what you see in front of you is the best you're ever going to see. That's the assumption you got to go with. If they're worth their salt. Yeah. So what I would do then is, and I would, I just got a processing down for it, and I would just I would, tell the interviewee, um, look, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I'm not, because I don't want to confuse potential uh, uh, with ability, or and the way I do that is past behavior is a good indicator of future behavior. So I avoided hypothetical questions, and I would use this as a star technique. And the star technique is, I would tell the interviewee, look, I'm going to ask you a set of questions. Now, that's another thing. Don't say I've got 13 questions or 12 questions, because then if you decide this person washes out early on, you don't want to you don't want them to say, "Oh, what happened?" They said 13 questions and he only gave me 5, and then he dismissed me
Right.
or her. So don't do that. Don't pigeonhole yourself. And I also want to just emphasize here, the best thing you can do to that interviewee, you never want to disgrace them. You want to leave them with good self-respect, and don't bust their chops and their self-esteem. Because they're gonna go out, and even if it wasn't the right hire, I want them to be saying, you know what, that was a professional approach. They took it
Right.
seriously, because they're going to be they're one portion of my PR out there in the community. So I would just tell them, look, I'm going to ask you a set of questions. I'm going to take a lot of notes, and it's these questions are going to be formatted in a manner of which it's I'm going to ask for a situation or a task. So the S is situation, or the T, task, and then I'm going to look for what your action and results are. So I'll get, we can give, we have, I'm going to do a shameless plug. We've got this for any of our listeners as you can contact us, and we have a set of the interview guides and the whole, toolkit on this. So, if you're interested in learning more, reach out to us. But now Other tip I would give the interviewer is, clear your desk. Make sure your desk in your office looks very, very professional. I would also say, and so that in that the interviewee could hear this, I would tell my personal assistant, now hold all calls when I'm with uh, Winona. Hold all calls when I'm with James. Because what I want to do is give the message, this person is important to me right now. And that's
I
the,
like that.
game is on now. So, the competencies that I look for, and they can change on this based upon the positions that's open that you're hiring for. But overall, again, for skills that are developed, and character traits, for skills, I'm looking at, can they self-manage themselves? And so what is their organization skills? What are their time management skills? Are they results oriented? What's their emotional competence? I'm going to have questions around that. I'm going to also, around, are they trustworthy? And if this is a position where I'm looking for a salesperson, are they entrepreneurial in spirit? Are they a risk taker? So I will gear questions, where I'm going to ask people. Um, and let's take one, emotional competencies. There's times in which someone's been rude to, we've all had times when someone's been rude to us. Can you describe a situation or when this has occurred, and what were your actions and results?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always used that answering structure, even when someone doesn't uh, outline that within an interview. I still always go back to very specific situations and use the STAR method when I answer questions in interviews, just because I feel like that's the best way to present myself, even if they're not asking me for it. I just have always gone back to those three main bullet points. What was the situation or the task that I was
Hmm.
doing? What were my actions and what were my results? And that has always done me well in interview processes, to be very specific about actual things as opposed to, like you said, hypotheticals of, because you very quickly get into these kind of grandiose and vague pronouncements of, oh no, I'm very trustworthy, anybody can say that. It's like, I always find really interesting connections between acting and the business world, and this is one of the strongest connections. When you're learning acting, you learn action, because action is what reads on stage. You don't be happy. Well, what does that mean? What is somebody being happy? What? No, if someone's skipping, that shows that they're happy, right? That
Right.
communicates that they're happy. And this is a similar thing. Too many times, if somebody's being vague in their questions, you're going to give them vague answers. And so I actually will go the opposite direction and tie it back to very specific things.
Because what you're doing, you're right. It is, the situation or task, action, or result. You could start with results, and then, hey, here's how I got the results. Here's, the task that I did, and here's how it all started. And I was given this situation. It doesn't have to be in that set order: situation, task, actions, results. You can start anywhere, but knowing that and having that acronym allows you to communicate a whole message. Uh, and I would just share this, like you said too, instead of being vague. And when people are starting to be vague and they don't have the answer, but they feel they have to fill that time up, or at least give a response. I would tell people, because my job again is, I don't want to bust their chops. I want them to leave with a, good self esteem, and that they thought I was very, again, this organization is very professional and one I would like to join. So I would also tell them, look, if I ask a question that you don't have an answer for, that's okay. Just let me know, and we'll go to another one. And if there's time permitted, we'll come back to that one.
Right.
So I would then, you raise another question, around integrity, that you could use. What are 2 or 3 principles or values that you try to follow in your work? Give me an example of a time when you applied these values. Now I'm gonna, um here's another one. We've all had times in which, we've fallen behind in our goals and you're not getting the results we wanted. Can you describe a time or situation when this occurred to you? And then what were your actions and results?
One of the other things that you've done too, I've seen you do, is point out to people that not all answers need to be professional,
Right.
right? Like if somebody starts struggling with a question, you'll often remind them, especially like a goal question would be great, right? We all have plenty of personal goals that we fall behind on. Your reaction in the workplace is going to be very similar to your reaction in your
Right.
personal life. So it doesn't matter really. Of course, most people are going to tend towards the professional side, but hey, it could be a weight loss goal
Sure.
or a goal of quitting smoking or whatever that goal is. Yeah, I've seen you do that when people start to struggle coming up with a situation. You'll just kind of gently remind them, hey, this can be personal as well, so you don't need to, whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yes. So, and that's and particularly if they're just coming out of college. That is I'm glad you brought that up because then
Absolutely,
they
yeah.
don't have the work experience. Now, in our interview guide, one of the things that we're doing to take away these biases and also making sure from an HR perspective we're not discriminating, we have a scoring system. And I think a great interview process is one where you integrate in a scoring system in regard to how they answer the questions. So ours is a 1 through 5, and the 4 or 5 to get a 4 or 5 just down below, and you would have this, in your. I have the interview guide printed out. I have my portfolio, and this is on the inside of the portfolio. These questions, and I would just say, if I'm not quite getting, a 4 or 5 on the one on integrity that I just stated would look like this: stated several principles or values reflect an exemplary professional or ethical standards, or described another one described a relevant example. The candidate took exemplary actions under extremely challenging circumstances. That would be a response where I'd give them a 4 or 5, and I set a benchmark. If they don't score over, let's say if I have 13 questions, and this is, and now this is 5 points per question, well, that's 65 would be the total. But if they don't get over a 45, for instance, where, you know what, I'm going to let them go. I'm not going to let them go to my second interview. And that's another process. Also take away my biases. I want this, and one, I want to have other people interview. If they pass the first interview, then they're going to be interviewed by someone else. And they also then get to meet the team members and start feeling better about the process. So I just wanted to share that. And now the last question I'm just going to, before we jump to the interviewee, and well, I have a few more things I just would like to hit, Dan. But the
Yeah.
last question is, I take my portfolio and this interview guide, and I put it, I just close it, and I ask the client and the interviewee, um, look, I've been doing most of the talking right now. So on a scale of 1 to 10, one, I don't know you very well. 10, I know you extremely well based upon the questions I was able to ask here. How well would you rate on that scale how well I know you? So if they give me a 7, if they give me a 9 or 10, yeah, it could be Pollyanna for me, and
Right.
the red flags are going up. But if they say, "Look, you got a 7 or 8," then I just say, "Okay, to help me in my decision making, what what other things do you want to tell me about yourself that will help me in my decisions to go forward in this process with you?"
Do most people say 7 or 8?
Pardon, Dan?
Do most people say 7 or 8?
Yeah, most of them do. Most of them will say, and then, boy, you're just giving them an opportunity, and you will hear you close that, your portfolio down. You just, open up your arms and just sit back and just listen. I'm gonna hear a lot of good stuff about this person that, and personal stuff that I can't ask, obviously, from an HR perspective. And I'm not gonna write any of this down, that's for darn sure, but, it also gives them just a chance to ask me and for them a chance to speak. Now, uh, so the now where do you go? So the interview, make sure you have a process in place where you can then tell the candidate, all right, this is the conclusion of the first meeting. We'll be reaching out to you in the next 48 hours because we have and I would let them know I have another 10 candidates to interview, or I have another 7 to interview. And that's another point I want to make. You should have, for an opening of a position, you should interview 4 people, select from 4 quality people for that one position you're trying to fill. Anything less than that, you might not have a good enough quality pool. Anything more than that, you know what? You're taking too much valuable time of your executive team interviewing these people. You're being too picky. So I like to look at 4 to 1.
From a salesperson's perspective, it's a question I've never actually asked you. You always get told in interviewing for sales, close at the end of the interview. And I won't go into the whole story, but the last set of interviews I went through for my last position, I had a recruiter that was coaching me through. And of course, he wanted me to get the position because he was going to get compensated if I got hired. And so each step through, he kept telling me, hey, you're not closing hard enough at the end of these interviews. That's the feedback that I'm getting. So my very last interview with the national sales manager, he did tell me the question that you just asked, what do I need to know? What else do I need to know about you? And I finished up that. And then he's like, okay, what other questions do you have? And I just said, I just need to know now when I'm going to start. And he, of course, gave me that. What triggered the thought in my mind was oh, we've got a couple other people we're interviewing, and it's gonna be another couple of weeks, and da 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 da. And I went after him again over the top of that. Like I was, me, I'm not a super forward person, but
Mhm.
I said no. You need to reach out to me and let me know when I'm gonna start. And I didn't end up getting the job, and that apparently was what they were looking for, was that aggressive of a close.
Right.
But how do you feel about that when hiring a salesperson?
Well, as long as it's done with the right tonality, I don't, I don't mind. It's that uh, and I'm going to segue, and I'm going to come back here to finish
Sure.
up the interview guide, and I'll let you talk about the interview UE and tips there. But I'm going to, I want to segue into the interviewee position and some questions. I've got really 3 questions I want to see from the interviewee to me. And one of the questions I'd want to have them ask me is this, um, the last person who had this position, where are they now in the firm?
Mm-hmm.
Or if they've left the firm, where did they get a bigger role? Because, now, if certainly as the interviewer, if this person did get promoted and moved up, I want to explain that and let them know so they can see this is a company that promotes from within. And that's, as long as you've got abundance of candidates, that's always good to know. Because I would tell my boys, when they were first out of college, now they're 36, 33, and 30. Look, you got, ask that person that's interviewing you, where's the person now that I'm going to be replacing here, and in your organization, or others who have worked underneath you, where are they now in the organization? If that person cannot demonstrate to you that they have promoted anyone within the organization, or if it, and the organization, I'd put your training shoes on and run the other way as fast as you can, because you need good mentors in your career, unless you come out with a real specific skill set. So then the next question I like to ask Dan from that one uh, look, um, if I'm taking over that person's role, someone else has been promoted, they left, or whatever. Okay, we got a fresh clean slate here, blank paper, however you want to say it. I'm sure that person did some things well. What are those one or two things they did well that you want to see continue happening? And then, now that you've got a fresh start here, what are the one or two things you would like to have seen that person do differently? Because you can tell the quality of the person by the quality of the questions they ask. Then I would say, now look, if we're sitting down 3 years from today, and you could even take it 1 year from today if it in the interview guide.
Yeah, this is the question that I was about to mention. This is
Yeah.
the great question to ask.
So thank you. So if we're sitting down a year from now and you said we've had a successful relationship, what must occur for that to happen? Now, what I'm doing here is you're managing the expectations, and you want to see them be able to explain to you what success looks like, and they're going to list out those actions, they're going to list out those results. Then you've got to be able to reflect on it and say, this is the right role for me. I can see myself in this position. This is going to be challenging. I can deliver on this. And if that's the case, boy, then Dan, your question, go for it. Excellent. I believe I can meet those expectations, and I would welcome the opportunity to be part of this team. And when can we get started? That's how I'd hit that one. Uh, Now, the going back, and the other thing, as an interviewer, and we're talking about processes, here's some other things that I would want to see you do in this process. Is one thing you cannot test is initiative. So here's if you like what you've seen and you're going to pass this person on to the next interviewer in your process. Next thing you'd want to give them a test, because you cannot test initiative. Now, I use that test twice in one sentence, but give them a test, and it looks like this. You know what? Go out, and here's a set of. I'm just going to give you, or I'll email to you, set of 10 questions about our company, and I want you to do your research, and come back and share what your findings were in the next in the next meeting. I'm only doing this one if I know this is someone I wanna move forward with. But if they come back and they didn't do they didn't do the, answer, the 10 questions, boy, that's a red flag right there.
It's telling you a couple of things, right? It's telling you either they weren't interested enough in
Yes.
the position, or they lack the initiative to even do that little.
Yep. Or and another test, hey, and then what I want you to do when you get to give us a call in the next 4 to 80 hours, just, and you can give them a little, initiative test there.
Sure.
And then explain your orientation process. What I've found is people are, they're willing to change is hard. We've talked about this many times. So, but I've found my personal experience is that people are open to receiving leadership. And leadership comes down to one word: influence, and accepting change in their first 6 months of their new career. If you don't make an impact with them by then, they're going back to their old behaviors. So I'd like to set up, and we'd have a 6-week review, 12-week, and 18-week review. And I'd explain to them and let them know, and that comes down to the last interviewer. He or she would lay out those six, and share with them the 6, 12, and 18 week uh, review meetings that were one-on-ones we're going to have with them. And here's where they should be in their career, progressed in their career at that time in regard to their skill development or being able to successfully do these tasks. Again, that way I'm putting a nail in the coffin that, uh, do you accept these tasks and, this role, uh, during the selection process, not after they're hired?
How do you this is a little bit outside the purview of the idea of interviewing, but, um, is I agree most of the time I run into situations like that when I'm working with advisors who are having issues with staff. They're like, "Well, I just can't get my, my sales assistant to do such and such." And I'll always ask that question, well, did you outline this role when you hired this person? And almost always the answer is no. If you're taking over an organization, you come in and kind of reestablish your expectations, right? If you're
Mhm.
coming in as a manager,
Yes.
that's instead of interview during the interview process, you would do that as basically a like a job review. Come in, sit down with each of your staff, and okay, what's your position? What are your tasks? Okay, here's what I see your role as. Here's how I'm defining it, and just kind of lay everything out on the table, correct?
Yeah, that's right, Dan, and that's now there. If I'm taking over as the manager and I'm of a a district or a division or a region, then I would review the processes, review the person conducting who owns those roles and those processes, and then look at their results. Now, I might have the wrong people in the wrong seat on this bus, so I'm going to do a shameless plug, and we should probably have a good friend of ours who I've hired out before, and it's Todd. And Todd has a cadre of tools that and a battery of tests that for $500, and then also they get an hour of his time to review these tests that he gives, and it lays out their strengths, lays out their opportunities, lays out their weaknesses. Here's what to be the best career for you, and look for these things. And he'll tell for that $500, I'm going to get a better chance of getting a match here. Besides using my interview guide, etc., and it's well worth my time. And also, those people, uh, you know what? They see the interviewee that this is a company or organization that's willing to invest in their people. And I still, even if it doesn't work out, uh, they walk away with something.
Yeah, I will jump in and just give Todd Mowney is Todd's last name, and his website is ROI That's ROI, return on investment, ROI coachingsolutions.com. And he has a great website with information about all of his services if you would like to touch base with him. If you do, let him know that it came from us. This is not a paid sponsorship. He's just a good friend, but it would be nice if somebody does reach out to him that you let him know that it came from our podcast. Yeah, I from an interviewee side, of course the big couple are show up on time. You got to show up on time, be dressed like you mentioned. You need to, even if you know that someone is a business casual, I always dress one step above,
Well said.
unless there's nowhere to go but up, right? Like if you're going into a wirehouse, of course they're all going to be in suits and ties and you formal attire, business attire. So pretty much, I'm always wearing formal business attire to an interview, unless I'm otherwise instructed. I've had situations where people have said to me in interviews, "Hey, we're not a formal shop. Don't You don't need to come." All dressed up. I typically then usually will almost always still at least wear a tie as a man. I may leave the jacket or wear, like a fleece or something like that, a little bit more casual. But I very rarely would go like in a polo shirt or something like that. I'd have to be,
Mhm.
but it also does depend a little bit on the industry. You know, you and I both come from the financial services side of things. If you're in a, one of my current clients is in, recycling and waste management, and it's a much more, you know, jeans and work coats and boots kind of industry. So it's possible that depending on what you know about your industry, but always go out of your way to figure out and on the safe side dress up versus dressing down. Definitely. I am. I, I was I'll be late to my own funeral. I was late to this morning getting up, Philip getting me going for the podcast today. Be on time. I typically am going to show up at least 15 minutes early. I'm always going to have a handful of questions to ask back. And Philip has already touched on a bunch of the questions. The 1 to 2 years from now, 3 to 5 years from now question is absolute gold. If you don't ask that question, I think you're crazy, because it just does so much to give you insight into whether the person that you're interviewing with is going to be have the processes in place to have a position that's going to be good for your development. I have gotten into a couple of positions where they weren't quite what I wanted, and the reason for that was typically processes. They just didn't have the processes or the kind of path that I could see where I was going to develop within the firm. And you quickly lose motivation. I think most people can realize that you're pretty quickly going to lose motivation there. The last one I'll point out is it is always good to connect with the person who is the interviewer. There is a famous story, gentleman that Philip knows, and I've known in a couple of different points in my career. Russ Look would tell this story. He was an old Keyport annuity wholesaler, and I worked with him again at Protective Life, and just one of the great all-time wholesalers I've ever met. But he would tell a story. I'm not sure if it's actually an urban legend or not, but it is a great story that interviewee comes in and is looking at the interviewer, and he's got it going through his mind that, oh, I need to connect with this guy. And he looks up on the wall and says, oh, I see there's a picture of you and Coach John Madden. When did you meet Coach Madden? And the gentleman turns around and looks at him and says, that's my wife. So just be careful with that. If there's a football helmet or something like that, go for that. But as soon as you start inferring things from people's pictures and stuff like that, just be careful about that. So
You're right.
that popped into my mind as we were going through this portion. You do want to connect with that person if you can, but just be careful. It can backfire on you.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna add a couple things, Dan. I like your 15 minutes, show up early, but I would spend 10 of those minutes in the parking lot. Go in,
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
You go in 5 minutes early. Anything more than that, it becomes awkward.
Yeah, overeager. You are overeager.
Yeah,
Thank you for
right.
clarifying that.
And also don't underestimate the personal assistant, the receptionist. That's your first contact.
That's a great point.
So make sure you make a good connection with those people, because what they're doing is they're looking at you to see if you pass the fine person test. And this is my last bit, and I want the fine person test is, do you represent, can I see you, what they're asking, representing our organization in the public? So they're looking at how you come across, your appearance, your demeanor, as well as then they're going to look at your skills. And shameless plug, Dan, I know we're going to have this out at the on the blog, but we're going to be giving a lot of tips for the interviewee to that I would how to pass the fine person's test. So I would look at that and use that before in getting ready.
One last question. As an interviewer, would you typically go and ask the receptionist their thoughts of the person?
Absolutely,
That's what I
absolutely.
thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will just second that as well. It's a great point. From my wholesaling career, it's something that I learned early on was especially if I were doing drop-in appointments for advisors that weren't working with me, I would usually come in and introduce myself to the assistant, and if I had been in the office before but had never met the rep. In fact, when I would do those drop-ins, I would actually come in and say, "You know what? Actually, I stopped by today to see you." And I would
Hmm.
actually try to connect with them in some way. And I had a couple of different ways that I would do that. I'd sometimes drop off lunch for the office, or I'd drop off, little gift baskets themed with uh, whatever holiday was around, whether it's Easter or Christmas or whatever. But I I would come in most of the time in situations like that, the assistant thinks that you're there to try and see the advisor. And in fact, I would always say it specifically, no, I'm actually here because I wanted to talk to you. And, kind of let them know that I understood that they were important to the office. So it's a little bit different of a context, but very similar when you're going into interview, in that how you connect with everybody you meet during that time is very, very important. So yeah, that's a great last point for us to wrap up with. So we're going to transition over to, actually, our article for this week is a white paper. And interestingly, we don't want to talk about the entire white paper. The white paper is put out by a company named Vestmark, and Vestmark is a software platform or technology platform for financial services. Just want to let everybody know that this is not a paid or sponsored uh, advertisement in any way. I found this white paper, and I actually found within the white paper itself is about advisors using new technology and transitioning their portfolio management technology. But within the white paper, on page 3, and we'll put a link to the paper on our website, go to value-ability.com under the content tab, and the link will be there. And on page 3, the information that I found really, really interesting in this white paper was about time allocation for financial advisors. And it breaks it out extremely detailed across 4 different sections. So client-facing activities, administrative, investment management, and personal development. And then within each area, it breaks it down even further. So under client-facing activities, as an example, it has client meetings, preparing for client meetings, prospecting for new clients, financial planning, e.g. plan creation, and then client service problems. Those actually line up right with the 5 sections of the financial planning wheel, right? And actually, now that I think about it, I'm not sure that I would call.
It's pretty close. It's not all.
Not all of
You
them.
don't have the set marketing efforts and setting appointments. But it definitely has your client facing initial meetings, the case analysis work, the solution
Right.
presentation meeting.
But I would even say that some of that isn't actually client facing. It's client related, but it's not client. I mean, creating a plan isn't client facing. You're not doing that with the
No,
client.
no, that's right. You might ask having to call them up or doing, in today's world now.
Could do a live
You can do
plan
it live,
creation.
I'm gonna
Sure.
there's a lot of planning software, I won't name the ones, but you
Yep.
boy, they're client facing right online, and you can just, complete the plan with them.
So the some of the interesting things that jumped out to me were generally the breakdown over and then it breaks it out by channel. So Wirehouse, National Regional BD, Independent BD, Independent RIAs, Hybrid RIAs, Insurance BD, and then in total. Overall, the breakdown is pretty similar.
Mhm.
55% roughly on client facing activities, 22% administrative, 16% investment management, and then only 5% personal development. My points that jump out there are the personal development side. That's a little low.
Absolutely, we've said this before. Look, isn't it just amazing? Professional athletes, professional entertainers, the actors, the actresses, they'll spend 90% of their time practicing or
Right,
training and 10% actually performing. But in corporate America, we've got it reversed. So I
right,
would agree that does stick out. Always should be, sharpening your blade or your saw.
right. That's probably a little bit of a false analogy from the standpoint that they only perform a limited amount of time, but
Mhm.
still the underlying message is 95.5 is too big the other direction,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Like I would say 10% should be a target that I think would be way more in line with wanting to spend increase your abilities. The other one is for all of those people, and I've can't tell you the number of times you run into this of especially in my wholesaling career where I'd have a new financial advisor just out on their own and I'm a portfolio manager. Like, okay. Sure. Well, you let me know how spending 80% of your time on your portfolios works for you when you have 3 clients. Right?
Right.
So that so many people look at this profession and think that financial advisor, investment advisor is portfolio manager. And here we've got just over 15% of your time is actually spent on actual investment management tasks. Um, Administrative and client facing, I think this, like I said, I didn't actually see that. Like I would call like plan creation part of administrative more than I would client facing, even though it does have something to do with the client. But other thing that jumped out that I thought was quite interesting was of all of the different styles of channel, the insurance broker dealer by far had the highest client facing numbers.
Well,
Now,
because insurance has to be sold versus financial planning. If you get them to own their own goals and they take more ownership of it. And if you do the plan, it takes it's objective and they get it. They buy in.
yeah,
That's my 2 cents.
yeah, I thought that. The other side of it was I thought that insurance BDs tend to be much more integrated. Now I've actually been on both sides of that. I worked for one insurance company where it was actually a detriment to be representing the company that owned the BD, and it was actually harder. Many of the reps at the firm wanted you to go above and beyond because they didn't want to see it to be seen as a conflict of interest. Then I worked at another insurance company, which I won't name, although people will probably be able to guess which one it is, where I, in fact, had business taken away from my advisor, who was an independent advisor, and given to the insurance company BD rep by my company, by the insurance company, because it was a company client. So it was a person who was a client of the insurance BD. We were going to be selling them a company product through a different advisor, and they actually pulled the app and gave it to the other advisor. So not only was it integrated, it was on the verge of illegal.
Hmm.
So the other side of that could be that they're much more closely aligned with their production company, so they spend less time on the administrative and investment management side. So, because that seems to be where it's coming from, is from the investment management portion. So, um, any other thoughts before we wrap up,
Sure.
Si?
I would great perspectives, and I think I would just share on this article. Technology is becoming more and more important as a tool to have in your tool belt every morning when you wake up. And I would encourage people uh, when they're looking at investing in the technology that what I have found, organizations generally who provide these sort of platforms, they underestimate the actual ability level of an advisor to integrate it into uh, to adapt and integrate into their practice. They think it's a lot easier than what it actually is. So just take a look, when you're going to make an investment here, on what type of back office support they provide and what's their success rate at adoption, and do your research, because this is, the fact with we're looking at how advisors spend time. I'm not surprised. That's the 55% or 60% there is face to face. Well, that's that is, Dan, what we call, right, the power of the triple R factor. You spend a lot of time with your clients, you're going to over deliver on your value proposition. There's retention. You get better retention, you're going to generate more revenue, and you're going to obtain more referrals. The power of the 3 R's right there.
Absolutely. Just lastly, I want to wrap up with one last thought. You know, most people that end up in our profession are, pretty type A, pretty outgoing, pretty control, that fall on that side, entrepreneurial. Um, the client facing side is where that is all generated. Just like you said, the 3 R's, the revenue. If you want to increase those things, you've got to increase the time that you are in front of the client. The one wholesaling position that I was at for the longest, I was calling primarily on one broker dealer, one of the biggest broker dealers in the nation, over 10,000 reps nationwide. And the top rep in the entire company was in my territory. And of course, I saw him speak a number of times, and every single time he said the same thing. And that was, my goal is to remove absolutely everything off my plate that isn't talking to clients. And time again, I would see new advisors come out of those meetings kind of shaking their heads and just saying, well, there's no way I can do that. He has 10 assistants, or however many he had. He had a number of assistants. And they're kind of missing the point there, right? What he said was, I work towards that. I work
Hmm.
towards removing everything that's not talking to clients. Not that he was successful at it, but that was his goal. And that, I think, is the biggest takeaway from this, is setting that up as the focus is, like anything, like attaining perfection. You're not going to get there, but you'll never get perfection, but you'll be really good in missing perfection. So with that, we will wrap up for this week. If you have topics that you would like us to cover in an upcoming episode, or questions for us, you can reach out to us via email, info@value-ability.com. Again, that's info@value-ability.com. Or you can reach out to us via our social media links, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find those at value-ability.com under the Contact Us tab. How much time do you spend on client-facing activities, and what things have you done to increase the amount of time that you are focused on clients? Reach out to us, let us know that, and then give us any other questions that you would like us to cover in upcoming episodes. Wherever you find us, please like, review, subscribe, and share. Next episode, episode 33, Understanding Reg BI, we are going to have a compliance specialist on to chat with us about the details of the upcoming regulation best interest. I honestly don't know a ton about it, so I'm very much looking forward to that. Please reach out to us as well and let us know, are there any specific questions you have that you want us to cover next week? So let us know that. As always, thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next week for that. And remember that financial success comes from building a plan on the foundation of your values, and building your ability will help you get there. This is a podcast collaboration, not a peer-reviewed journal or a sponsored publication. We make no representations as to accuracy, completeness, correctness, suitability, or validity of any information in this podcast, and will not be liable for any errors, omissions, or delays in this information, or any losses, injuries, or damages arising from its display or use. All information is provided on an as-is basis. It is the listener's responsibility to verify their own facts. You should be aware of the real risk of loss in following any strategy or investment discussed on this podcast. Strategies or investments discussed may fluctuate in price or value. Investors may get back less than invested. Investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You must make an independent decision regarding investments or strategies mentioned on this podcast. Before acting on information on this podcast, you should consider whether it is suitable for your particular circumstances, and strongly consider seeking advice from your own financial or investment advisor. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any other agency, organization, employer, or company. Assumptions are not reflective of the position of any entity other than the authors, and since we are critically thinking human beings, these views are always subject to change, revision, and rethinking at any time. Please do not hold us to them in perpetuity.